Welcome back. You're watching the Jacksonville History Show, brought to you by the Jacksonville Historical Society and Comcast. I'm Harry Reagan, Board Chairman of the Jacksonville Historical Society. Now we turn to the history of law enforcement in Jacksonville, and our guest is Bob Morgan, who has written a history of law enforcement in Jacksonville. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Harry. Nice to be here.
This has never been done before. No one has ever written the history of law enforcement in Jacksonville.
I'm very proud to have been given the opportunity to do just that.
And it's writing about two agencies for people who have moved to Jacksonville since 1967.
It's two
They may
districts.
not know that there used to be a county law enforcement agency and a city law enforcement agency.
Correct. We gave them two for the price of one.
So you really were writing up until the 1967 part of the history about the county sheriff's office and the city police department.
Correct.
Well, you learned a lot. Where would you start to find out about the history of law enforcement?
Well, Jacksonville was platted and named in 1822, and literally the history of the police department in some form or another goes back that far. To my amazement, we know a great deal about what Jacksonville was like going that far back. The first thing that really struck me was when you go back to 1870s Jacksonville and take a look at it, and we're going to take a look at it here in a few pictures in a moment. It looks just like Tombstone, Arizona, or Dodge City. It was the wild East.
Let's go ahead and take a look at that street scene.
Okay.
This is what street that we're going to take a look at?
It's going to be Bay Street, East Bay Street, looking east from about Ocean when we can get it. There it is.
Not a paved street, by the way.
A dirt street, saloons, shoot 'em ups, horses, everything you picture in an old West. We had it right here.
And as you have mentioned many times to me, writing the history of law enforcement is really writing the history of Jacksonville.
Exactly.
Because
there's no separating the police from the community because they were in the thick of it from the very beginning and still are.
Well, let's take, this is an interesting character here, the next photo. Tell us about him.
We'll get this guy up on the screen.
Yeah.
There he is. That's none other than notorious Western outlaw John Wesley Hardin. And he killed more men than William Bonney, Billy the Kid, and he lived here in Jacksonville, right here, in around 1875. He sold cattle here and ran a saloon, and was actually aided in his escape by a Jacksonville police officer, which is an interesting story.
Didn't get to be quite as famous as Billy the Kid, but maybe just didn't have as good a press agent or something.
Well, there was a movie made about his life. It starred Jeffrey Hunter, the actor, who actually resembles John Wesley Hardin a little bit.
Well, I know a chapter in the book, and by the way, it's part of a yearbook for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Correct. About half the book is your history. That part of the book is called The Wild, Wild East.
And it was.
So
and it was.
Tell us a little bit about the Wild, Wild East.
Well, Hardin was being pursued by the Pinkerton agency. Allan Pinkerton started as a bodyguard to Abraham Lincoln, and of course he later went after Jesse and Frank James. And he got the word John Wesley Hardin was here in Jacksonville, and a police officer named Gus Kennedy put the word out to Hardin, and they got into a shootout near Baldwin, and Hardin escaped. He was later captured in Pensacola. It's kind of odd the policeman would help Hardin, but back then, if you had served in the Confederacy, you despised the Pinkertons because they were very loyal to the Union. So the police here were happy to help Mr. Hardin at that time.
And we've got a picture that shows an interesting happening that I guess occurred on a fairly regular basis.
Oh, yes.
A hanging.
This is an actual hanging. It was actually made in South Florida right around the 1880s, but this is how people were executed.
Public execution.
Public execution. This was the way it was done in Jacksonville, and it was done many times in Jacksonville. And up until modern times, the sheriff of Duval County was actually the executioner. He was the man who actually sprang the trap on
Each
the prisoner.
county was responsible for executing its own murderers or whatever.
So the Wild, Wild East ties in right there. It was very much like the old Western movies you've seen.
And now a famous picture, at least famous,
I
we
love
see this
this
in
photo.
the hallways of the Police Memorial Building.
I call this the great photo of 1896. It was made April the 1st, April Fool's Day, and there's a rookie in that picture. I won't try to point him out. He's in the back row back there. But his name is Abel Roberts, and he had just been hired. He was hired on in I'm going to lose the year here. He was hired on at the age of 20 in 1893.
Okay.
And he served an incredible 51 years, 27 of them as the chief of police. And he was an eyewitness to the history of Jacksonville. I'm going to run through a lot of photos at this point and show you some of the things he did.
Okay, well,
saw.
This next one is early police transportation.
There we go.
This might have been a SWAT team or something.
Right. He would have driven this little paddy wagon. Paddy wagon, by the way, comes from the word paddy roller, which was an African American's way of saying patrol back in that day. So we get paddy wagon. Next photo. We're going to have a bunch of them running in pretty quick succession here. That's Black Maria, which is a heavier version of the paddy wagon. Most of the cities had one in that day. Abel Roberts would have driven that vehicle. Next photo, please.
Not quite as quick as you are, Bob,
yeah,
so
sorry,
give us a chance to make the changes here.
I'm playing heck with our crew here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at this.
That's a street scene made in 1894. That's what Jacksonville looked like before the Great Fire in 1901. Actually, there have been about 5 Great Fires, but 1901 was the real biggie. Napoleon Broward was our sheriff in 1894, and if you'll invite me back, we'll do a full show on him. He was an incredible,
very interesting character,
incredible man, very important history. This is Lieutenant Breaux, Edward Breaux, patrolling, excuse me, in the devastated streets of the city of Jacksonville right after the 1901 fire. That's a very rare photo that came from Tallahassee, and many of these photos are from the Jacksonville Historical Society, which was an invaluable resource for.
And the fire, of course, had a terrific impact not only on the fire department but on the police department as well.
It was the mother of all traffic jams.
Yeah.
People brought out all their worldly goods and piled them up in the street, and the poor police officers had to try to be able to get people away from.
And then afterward, in the process of rebuilding the city and so forth, there were major law enforcement problems, I guess. Major.
And it's detailed in the book. Our next photo, that's the 1903 police station. It was built to replace the one that burned, and it stood where the Florida Theater is today. It was demolished when the Florida Theater was built.
That's I guess the oldest existing police structure these days would be 711 Liberty.
711 Liberty, and it was completed and opened around 1921, if I'm not mistaken.
As the city police station, and then it was turned over to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and now the Sheriff's Office has it again.
Now we're going to take it back again. We're running out of room down there.
Well, this is a fascinating photo. Let's take a look at the police car of the
This is
early days.
a 1911 Cadillac touring car that Abel Roberts would have driven, although he's not in that particular picture. That's the first police car that I was able to dig up, and we only got it because citizens started owning automobiles and we couldn't run them down on horseback. Not enough horsepower.
So it is true, of course, that in the early days, horses were the major means of transportation for the police as well as anybody else.
As well as
bicycles
a good set of legs,
came along.
And a good set of legs, too.
Yes.
They had walking.
Right. Let's take a look at another photo of downtown.
That's Bay Street being rebuilt after the 1901 fire. That's made about 1910. That's West Bay Street at about Bay and Laura, and the famous Jacob's Clock is in the lower right, which now stands on Laura Street, near Laura and Adams. And
streetcars, a terrific form of transportation in their day.
Okay,
back to Abel Roberts. Let's take a look at, we've talked a lot about him.
Okay, this is our final photo, and this is Chief Roberts about the year I was born, 1947, when it was about the time he finished up his career. And he just had an incredible career. The first police boat was named in his honor, and we owe a great deal of debt to this man and to the many officers who served our community.
No one, I guess, other than Dale Carson, served at the head of a law enforcement agency longer than Abel Roberts. And Dale Carson narrowly, I think, 28 years as sheriff.
Correct. And those days are gone forever. We have term limits with some offices, and generally speaking, people don't stay in the saddle quite that long.
And another interesting thing, we've talked a lot about this, and we don't have enough time to talk about everything I'd like to cover, but early days as a police officer were somewhat challenging because nothing was provided for you.
Correct.
You had to buy your own gun and your own uniform.
Literally, the officer had
provide your own horse.
Had to purchase his uniform and his gear out of his paycheck, and his paycheck was just absolutely appalling back in that day. Barely enough to feed a family.
And professionalism came along a little later with training and certain requirements to become a police officer.
Oh, yes.
I guess it was kind of political.
It was very political in the beginning. Still a little bit so today, but not nearly so much so.
History of Law Enforcement was written for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office yearbook, which you have in your hand there. Not available to everybody because it was produced for employees of the JSO.
Correct, and their
but
families.
People could see it in the library and various other places if they want. And we hope to make it available on the website and other things at the JSO.
We hope so. We're very proud of it, and I'm deeply grateful to all of the people who participated to make it possible.
Important point, because a lot of people sent in material, historical material.
A lot of family members.
Bob Morgan, thank you for being with us on Signal 94.
Thanks, Harry.
That's our show for tonight. The Jacksonville History Show is here every Wednesday night. For more information about the Jacksonville Historical Society, visit our website, www.jackshistory.com. So long, everyone.